Hi, everyone. I'm David Aragona, and welcome to the January 5th edition of Horses to Watch. We carefully analyze some trips from the past week, looking for horses that might have encountered adversity and are worth betting back when they run back in the future. This week, we came back from a break at Aqueduct. They took that entire Christmas week off, so they hadn't had racing at Aqueduct in about 11 or 12 days. They returned to racing on December 30th. This is obviously the first Horses to Watch episode of the new year, 2022, so the prior racing week at Aqueduct straddles that new year from December 30th through the first couple days in January. And we'll talk about four races from that past racing week, beginning with that Thursday, December 30th card. The fifth race of the day was a maiden special weight going 6 furlongs for the 2-year-olds. Let's break these runners from the gate, and I want to focus on the number 5, Check That Chip, who is in those purple and yellow silks. You're going to see get steady to the back of the pack right about here. You can even see it better if you check out the head on replay on your own. This horse gets bumped, squeezed back between horses, and you can see him even here turning his head sideways a little bit as he's trying to angle around that horse that's backing up in his face. Just a really difficult beginning for this first-time starter. It's always tough for firsters that break slowly, but this one in particular had some trouble getting steadied back and having to alter course. And you could see after that troubled start, he makes a pretty eye-catching move into the race, wide passing horses all the way up into third place by the time they're heading around the far turn. Now, there are some situations to talk about on this Thursday card and really throughout the entire week at Aqueduct where it was really difficult for horses to make up ground. You saw a lot of gate-to-wire winners, horses leading for the entire way, and you didn't see too many horses making successful moves from the back of the pack. And while Check That Chip did make a big move from last up into third place on the far turn, you're going to see he pays the price for it here as he's going to fade through the lane. He's racing on his left lead, never changing over to his correct lead through the stretch of this race. That's something that you often see with first-time starters, just a little bit of greenness. They'll often figure that out in their subsequent racing. But just a horse that I thought that did some running within the race that ends up finishing last of 7, but obviously did a lot more work in the middle portion of this race than the final result would indicate. So a runner for Gustavo Rodriguez, that's a homebred out of a pretty good dam that earned over $200,000 that I think does have more upside and will do better in subsequent races. So we'll check that chip, one worth following when he makes his second start, hopefully in the coming weeks at Aqueduct. Let's move on to a race from Friday's card at Aqueduct, December 31st, that New Year's Eve card. There are a couple of races I want to talk about from this day, beginning with race 6, an optional claiming 62,500, nominative to other than the allowance condition going a mile on the main track. Let's break these runners from the gate, and it's an interesting start to watch because there are a few horses in this field that were just not prepared for the gates to open, one of them being the number 5 Prioritized. And you can see those 3 horses, the 5, 6, and 7 alongside each other, all unprepared for the start. And Prioritize arguably takes the worst of it. He just kind of falls out of the starting gate and really isn't a jog when they leave there and is far behind the field in the early going. Now, Prioritize is a horse that really just doesn't possess much early speed to begin with, even when he breaks cleanly. So he's going to find himself way at the back of the pack here. And that's just not where you wanted to be this week at Aqueduct, where speed just seemed to be so dangerous. And you're going to see this race play out in a fashion where forwardly placed horses just dominate the race. The number 9, number 4, and number 6 will complete the trifecta in this race, and they currently are in those trifecta positions, first, second, and third, just in a different order. And something to note is you see that 25-1 shot, Pioneer Spirit, leading this field early, and you saw a lot of this during the week at Aqueduct, where speed horses, even if they were big prices, were able to hold on if they had that forward early position, and Pioneer Spirit is able to do that, eventually finishing second in this race. The other thing to note is you see the fractions going up. This was the one day of the week where the track seemed to be playing a little bit faster, and the pace of this race was just extremely slow. 24 plus seconds for the opening quarter, 47 and change for the half mile. They finish up this race in 1:36. So the fact that Prioritize is all the way at the back of the pack behind those slow fractions just really gave him no chance to close into this race. So that, the pace situation, coupled with the speed favoring surface, it was really working against Prioritize on this day. And if you doubt my reading of the pace, just go take a look at the Timeform US speed figures and pace figures, which you can find in Timeform US PPs. I'll just read them off to you. Timeform US creates pace figures for every fraction direction of the race and a final time number. And the pace figure line, you like to see it be pretty even from beginning to end. And the pace figure line for this race was 67, 80, 98, 112. So a steeply rising pattern, and that indicates an extremely slow pace for this horse to close in to prioritize. He was competing for H. James Bond on this day, but this was the final start he made for those prior connections because he was claimed out of this race by sharp claiming owner Michael Dubb for trainer Rudy Rodriguez. So expect to see a better effort from Prioritize when he comes back first off the claim for the new connections in his subsequent start. The other race that I want to talk about from this Friday, December 31st card at Aqueduct is the final race of the day, race 8, a New York bred maiden special weight going a mile, that same one-turn distance on the main track. This time, though, for the 2-year-olds on the final day that they are 2-year-olds before they turn 3 on January 1st. Let's break these runners from the gate. And again, we're going to focus on the start of this race with regard to the number 3, Salty Air. And you can see him towards the right of your screen throwing his head about. He had a horse, the number 1, veer over into his path coming out of the starting gate, and he just reacts very badly to that trouble. And you can see Eric Hansel is having a really tough time getting this horse to settle, moving down the backstretch. He's leaning back in the stirrups. This horse is still throwing his head about a little bit, tried to move up between horses, getting a little bit rank and green. It should be noted, this was the first start this horse was making wearing blinkers, and it just seemed like he was not fully adjusted to the new equipment that he was wearing in this race because he overreacted to that poor start, overreacted to racing in behind horses down the backstretch. And again, this is that same weekend and day, December 31st, where it was so difficult to make up ground. And it should be noted, the few horses that did make up ground over this track were saving ground for the majority of their trips. And you're going to see a closing winner of this race, the number 6, Boss Making Boss Moves. But he is inside for about half of this trip. So I think that allowed that horse to be successful. Salty Air, he's going to finish way back in this race, losing by many, many lengths. He gets distance through the stretch, but just a horse that, even though he lost by so much, I think it's worth drawing a line through this race because of the way the track was playing, the fact that he had so much trouble at the start, and after he just kind of fights his rider for the beginning of this race, you're going to see Eric Cancel, there he is highlighted at the back of the pack, just basically stand up in the stirrups. He's not motivating this horse at all as they come through the stretch of this race, so he just allows him to drop completely out of contention. Again, a race that I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock in. Now, it's questionable how much of ability this horse really does have. He's finished towards the back of the pack in most of his races so far. This is the 3rd start of his career, but he had shown at least some signs of life in his first couple of starts. He was running on well at the end of his sprint race 2 back, and I still think this horse deserves a chance to go longer. He's a half-brother to 2 pretty good horses for these same connections, Chowda and Lobster, horses that have placed in or won stakes races going longer distances. This horse, Salty Air, is by micromanaged, so he's really bred to go these longer 1 mile plus distances. I just think this was not the right situation for him. He deserves one more chance in a route race, especially if they do decide to drop him in for a $40,000 maiden claiming tag next time out. Finish things up with a race from New Year's Day, Saturday, January 1st. This is the 4th race on the card, and we got some more rain in the New York area this weekend after the track dried out on Friday. It was wet again for the Saturday card, but that pesky speed bias that we saw on Thursday and Friday, it was still in evidence on Saturday and really through the entire weekend. So you do want to watch for horses that were against that situation. And there's one in this 4th race, a starter allowance race for the fillies and mares going 6 furlongs. Let's break these runners from the gate. There was a lot of speed signed on, and I want to focus on the number 5, Casilda 40 Tails, who was expected to be one of those speed horses. She's in those black silks with those distinctive Juan Vasquez white blinkers in the middle of the pack there, and you can see she broke about a step slowly, was not that quick into stride, and her rider, Joseph Barrios, really tries to hustle her up to get into a forward position. He actually puts her to the whip coming out of the starting gate. You can see that when you watch the head-on, but she's not able to get forward enough, and she winds up in a situation where she's running up onto the heels of the speed horses and has to back off a little bit, and she ends up in a position that you just did not want to be on this track, chasing wide behind horses, where a speed horse who maybe not the horse that you were expecting to be on the lead outright, the number 6 Violent Vixen, just gets to the lead and is able to control this race on the front end, riding the rail the entire way. And Casilda 40 Tails just ends up playing catch up for the entire race, chasing horses on the outside. She makes a decent run to get up into third or fourth by the time they reach the quarter pole, but she's going to flatten out in the stretch here. This is a horse who had achieved a blowout victory in her prior start for the Juan Vasquez barn with a huge improvement, winning in gate-to-wire fashion against a weaker fielded Aqueduct, but she wasn't able to get that same trip here, finding herself in a race with a lot more speed after that slow break. And she was also being ridden by a jockey that just has not had much success on this circuit or in general over the past year. It was a tricky situation where Jorge Vargas had been assigned to rider initially, but he had tested positive for COVID-19 this week, so he was off all of his mounts. So Joseph Barrios was pinch hitting for Jorge Vargas on this horse, and just not the kind of ride that you really want to see a horse get over that speed favoring track. So Kizilda Fortitail is a horse that I would give another shot to, especially if she drops in class next time and finds herself in a race that has a little bit less pace in it. So a lot of races you can watch from this past week, horses that were against the track or encountered trips. I tried to talk about some horses that had some trouble in addition to being against the track. So horses that were compounded by multiple set of circumstances in these races. So ones that you might want to follow when you bet these horses back in the future. And you can follow these horses by adding them to your horse watch on DRF.com. Just add these horses to your list and you'll get email notifications when they run back in the future. Thanks for watching this week, and make sure to tune in for future episodes of Horses to Watch on upcoming Wednesdays.